We're going to start with the least dramatic and work our way to the most dramatic ones on this list. Julian, 361 to 363 AD. Julian is known to history as Julian the Apostate because he completely rejected Christianity. Knowing that religious reform alone wouldn't secure his legacy, he launched a very ambitious invasion of the Sasanian Persian Empire. The campaign started well, but Julian made a catastrophic strategic mistake by ordering his own supply ships burned deep in enemy territory to prevent them from falling into Persian hands, leaving his army stranded in a hostile desert. During a sudden skirmish, Julian rushed to the front lines to lead his men, but failed to put on his protective body armor. A stray spear pierced his unprotected torso, which ended up killing him. Because his sudden death instantly ended the pagan revival and put a Christian emperor back on the throne. Rumors persisted for centuries that the fatal spear hadn't been thrown by a Persian at all, but rather by one of Julian's own Christian soldiers. Valentinian III, 425 to 455 AD. By the time Valentinian III took the throne, the Western Roman Empire was barely holding together, surviving almost entirely because of General Flavius Aetius, who was a very respected military general. Valentinian III, however, was deeply insecure and grew jealous of the popularity and credit his general received. A scheming senator preyed upon this insecurity and convinced Valentinian that Aetius was actively planning to seize the throne for himself. During a routine financial meeting, Valentinian suddenly jumped up and personally stabbed the unarmed general to death. Just a few months later, two of Aetius's fiercely loyal former bodyguards walked right up to Valentinian during an archery practice outside Rome and hacked the defenseless emperor to death in broad daylight while the surrounding crowd watched without trying to stop them. Caracalla, 198 to 217 AD. Caracalla was one of the most violent and ruthless emperors Rome ever had, making his brutal methods clear from the very beginning when he had his younger brother and co-emperor Geta murdered inside their mother's arms. Knowing the Senate despised him, Caracalla would keep the military loyal by raising soldiers' pay. However, his paranoia eventually turned against him when Macrinus, a high-ranking official, learned of a circulating prophecy predicting that he would overthrow the emperor. Knowing that if Caracalla ever heard about this prophecy, he would be executed immediately, Macrinus decided to manipulate a soldier named Martialis, who held a personal grudge against the emperor, into carrying out an assassination. The opportunity came during a military campaign when Caracalla stepped away from his imperial guard to relieve himself on the side of the road. Martialis approached the vulnerable emperor and stabbed him to death on the spot, allowing Macrinus to seize the throne. Caligula, 37 to 41 AD. Caligula started out as one of the most popular emperors Rome had ever seen, but everything changed when he fell dangerously ill, just a few months into his rule, which turned him very paranoid, sadistic, and delusional. He reportedly threatened to make his horse one of Rome's highest political officials. While the Senate despised his behavior, what actually got him killed was his habit of publicly humiliating his own bodyguards, particularly mocking Cassius Chaerea, a high-ranking officer in the Praetorian Guard, by making jokes about his masculinity in front of the court. Eventually, Chaerea had enough and he organized a group of fellow officers who cornered Caligula in a dark palace hallway and stabbed him to death, with the emperor reportedly screaming, "I'm still alive," as they struck. Nero, 54 to 68 AD. What caused Nero's downfall was a massive financial disaster he created himself. After the Great Fire of Rome tore through the city in 64 CE, Nero needed massive sums of money to rebuild the city. To pay for it, he imposed brutal taxes on the outer provinces and devalued Rome's currency so badly that the economy started collapsing, leading military commanders in Gaul and Spain to launch open rebellions against him by 68 AD. With no one to protect him, Nero fled the city to hide in a villa outside Rome. The Senate officially declared him a public enemy, meaning anyone who found him was legally allowed to torture and kill him on sight. Because he couldn't bring himself to commit suicide, he ordered a servant to help him drive a blade into his throat, a famous act that wiped out the entire Julio-Claudian dynasty and immediately plunged the empire into a bloody civil war. Elagabulus, 218 to 222. Elagabulus was only 14 years old when he became emperor, placed on the throne by his politically cunning grandmother, Julia Maesa. Once he gained absolute power, he immediately scandalized conservative Roman society by demanding that Romans abandon Jupiter, the king of their traditional gods. Realizing that his bizarre behavior was about to destroy everything her family had built, his grandmother began quietly promoting his younger cousin, Alexander Severus, as a more respectable alternative to the throne. When Elagabulus figured out the plot and tried to have his cousin killed, the Praetorian Guard revolted, brutally murdering the 18-year-old emperor and his mother, dragging their bodies through the streets of Rome and dumping them into the Tiber River before the Senate erased his name from public records forever. Vitellius, 69. Vitellius became emperor during the chaos of the Year of the Four Emperors, securing the job purely because powerful legions decided to support him. Once he actually arrived in Rome, however, he showed zero interest in running the empire, choosing instead to spend his time throwing expensive feasts and banquets that drained the treasury. His reckless reign didn't last long, as the massive armies stationed in the eastern provinces revolted and declared their own general, Vespasian, as the rightful emperor, sending troops marching directly toward Rome. Vitellius panicked, offering to give up the throne peacefully if he could just retire. But his own die-hard supporters refused to let him surrender, and Vespasian's soldiers weren't interested in mercy. The result was brutal, street-by-street fighting inside Rome itself, until soldiers finally found Vitellius hiding, dragged him out into the open to be mocked and humiliated by the Roman mob, and executed him near the Forum before tossing his body into the Tiber River. Commodus, 180 to 192 AD. Commodus had every advantage a Roman emperor could ask for as the son of Marcus Aurelius, but he had no interest in following his father's example of wisdom and duty. Instead, he became obsessed with his own greatness. He went so far as to rename the city of Rome after himself and change the names of all 12 months on the calendar to match his personal imperial titles. Commodus would unknowingly seal his fate by drafting a kill list that his mistress Marcia, his Praetorian commander, and his inner circle discovered, which scheduled them all for execution on New Year's Day. That very night, they decided to strike first by slipping poison into his wine. But when Commodus vomited it up, they panicked and sent in Narcissus, his personal wrestling partner and fitness trainer, who successfully strangled the emperor to death in his bath, ending the Antonine dynasty and throwing Rome into a civil war.